Have you ever wondered if a simple act of kindness could change someone's life forever? I never thought making an extra plate of food would lead to one of the most extraordinary moments of my life. What started as a daily meal for a homeless veteran turned into a meeting with a 4-star general and a story that will leave you in tears. Stay with me until the end to discover how this chance encounter revealed a decorated war hero's true identity and the incredible way the military honored both of us. Welcome to Honor Echoes, where we share the untold stories of America's heroes. Before we dive into today's remarkable story, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these powerful tales of courage, sacrifice, and the extraordinary impact veterans have on our lives. Your subscription helps us honor those who served and ensures their stories echo for generations. I still remember the first time I saw him. It was a bitterly cold December morning in Boston, the kind where your breath forms clouds that hang in the air. I was walking to my small cafe on Boylston Street, coffee clutched in my gloved hands, when I noticed him huddled in the doorway of the abandoned building next door. An older man with a weathered face and a ragged green army jacket, his possessions piled in a shopping cart beside him. Something about his eyes caught my attention. Despite the cold and his circumstances, there was a quiet dignity there. No pleading, no desperation, just a resigned acceptance of his situation. I'm not sure why, but I stopped. Maybe it was because my own father had served in Vietnam and struggled for years afterward. Or maybe it was simply because it was 20 degrees outside, and no human being should have to endure that alone. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, offering my untouched cup. "It's still hot." He looked up, surprise flashing across his face before he carefully took the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "Much appreciated." That could have been the end of it, one small act of kindness on a cold winter day. But as I unlocked my cafe and began preparing for the morning rush, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Before I knew it, I was preparing an extra breakfast sandwich and another coffee. When I brought it out to him, he seemed genuinely shocked. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," I replied. "I wanted to. I'm Sarah. By the way, I own this place." "John," he said simply, not offering a last name. "Thank you, Sarah." That was the beginning. The next day I brought him breakfast again. And lunch. By the end of the week, it had become our routine. I'd bring him food 3 times a day, and we'd chat for a few minutes each time. At first, our conversations were superficial, the weather, the neighborhood, my complaints about difficult customers. But gradually, John began to open up. He told me he'd served in the army, 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. He didn't go into details about what he'd seen or done there, but the shadows that crossed his face told me enough. When he came home, he struggled with PTSD. His marriage fell apart. He lost his job. And eventually, he lost his home. "It happens faster than you'd think," he told me one day as we sat on milk crates behind my cafe during my lunch break. "One day you're normal, with a life and a future. The next, you're wondering how you'll make it through the night. How long have you been?" I couldn't bring myself to say homeless. "On the streets," John finished for me. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. The precision of his answer broke my heart. He was still counting the days, which meant he hadn't given up hope that things might change. As winter deepened, I worried about John constantly. Boston winters can be deadly for those without shelter. One particularly brutal night, with temperatures dipping below 0 and a snowstorm raging, I couldn't bear the thought of him out there. I closed the cafe early and went looking for him, trudging through snowdrifts with a thermos of soup and news that I'd booked him a room at the budget motel down the street. I found him in his usual spot, nearly buried under a growing mound of snow. "John, please," I begged, "just for tonight. It's dangerous out here." He hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Finally, he nodded. "Just for tonight," he agreed. One night turned into 2, then a week. I couldn't afford to keep paying for the motel indefinitely, but I also couldn't let him go back to the streets. So I made him an offer. The cafe had a small storage room in the back, It wasn't much, but it had heating and a couch. He could stay there if he wanted. I can't accept that, John said firmly. Then work for it, I suggested. I could use help around here. Dishes, cleaning, maybe eventually some food prep. Nothing complicated. Again, he hesitated. But when he finally agreed, I saw something I hadn't seen before, a spark in his eyes, purpose. The arrangement worked better than I could have imagined. John was punctual, thorough, and hardworking. He never came to work anything less than freshly showered and cleanly dressed in the spare clothes I'd given him. Customers liked him, and soon he was doing more than just washing dishes. He was greeting people, taking orders, even helping with simple cooking tasks. For 6 months, this was our routine. I never pried too deeply into his military service, sensing it was still too painful for him to discuss. But occasionally, he'd share snippets, the camaraderie he'd felt with his unit, the children he'd met in Afghan villages, the desert sunsets that were more beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. And sometimes, in quiet moments when the cafe was empty, I'd catch him staring into the distance, lost in memories I couldn't begin to comprehend. One afternoon, a distinguished-looking older man came into the cafe. His posture was ramrod straight, his clothes impeccable, and something about him screamed military even in civilian attire. He ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen where John was working. After about 20 minutes, just as I was beginning to wonder about his interest, he approached the counter. "Excuse me," he said politely. "The gentleman working in your kitchen, that wouldn't happen to be John Mercer, would it?" I hesitated, protective of John's privacy. "May I ask who's inquiring?" The man smiled. "Of course. My name is Robert Collins. I served with John in Afghanistan. I've been looking for him for quite some time." Something in his tone reassured me. I called John from the kitchen. The moment John saw Robert, he froze. Then, to my astonishment, he snapped to attention and saluted. "At ease, Master Sergeant," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been a long time." They embraced, and I discreetly gave them space, moving to serve other customers. But I couldn't help overhearing bits of their conversation, mentions of Kandahar, of something called Operation Mountain Viper, of people whose names meant nothing to me but clearly meant everything to them. After Robert left, John was quieter than usual. When I finally asked him about it, he shook his head. "Robert was my commanding officer," he explained. "A good man, one of the best I've ever known. He seemed very happy to find you," I observed. John nodded. "I disappeared on a lot of people when I came back. Wasn't in a good place. Didn't want them to see what I'd become." I wanted to tell him that what he'd become was still worthy of love and respect. But before I could find the words, he continued. "Sarah, there's something I haven't told you about my service." He paused, struggling. I didn't just serve. I was Special Forces. Green Beret. The revelation stunned me. I'd heard enough about Special Forces to know they were the elite of the elite. And suddenly, many things about John made more sense. His quiet competence, his observant nature, the way he could move silently even in a crowded room. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He shrugged. Didn't seem relevant to washing dishes. 2 days later, Robert returned. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 other men in civilian clothes accompanied him, all with the same military bearing. They asked to speak with John and me together. Confused but curious, I closed the cafe early, and we sat at a corner table. "John," Robert began, "I'm not here by accident. After I left the Army, I joined the Veterans Affairs Outreach Program. We've been looking for you for over 2 years. John's expression remained neutral, but I saw his hands tense on the table. "Why?" he asked simply. Robert exchanged glances with his companions. "Because there are people who need to thank you. People who owe you their lives." Over the next hour, Robert told me a story that John had never shared. During his final deployment in Afghanistan, John's unit had been ambushed, outnumbered and outgunned. They were pinned down in a remote valley. When their communications were destroyed and 2 men were critically wounded, John had volunteered to go for help. He traveled 18 miles through enemy territory, Robert said, his voice filled with admiration. Alone, at night, with minimal supplies. When he reached our forward operating base, he didn't wait for treatment for his own injuries. He immediately led a rescue team back. Robert turned to John, whose eyes were fixed on the table. Every single man in that unit came home alive because of you, John. Everyone. I looked at John, seeing him in an entirely new light. This quiet, humble man who had been sleeping in doorways and washing dishes, he was a hero in the truest sense of the word. There's more, Robert continued. The reason we've been searching for you is because you were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for your actions that day. But you were already stateside, receiving treatment, when the ceremony was held. Your medal has been waiting for you for over 3 years. John finally looked up, his expression a complex mixture of pride and pain. I don't deserve a medal. I was just doing my job. You deserve this, and more, Robert replied firmly. And there's someone who wants to present it to you personally. 1 week later, my small cafe was transformed. The local VA had helped spread the word, and members of John's former unit had flown in from across the country. Military personnel in full dress uniforms stood alongside regular customers who had come to know and respect the quiet man who kept the cafe running smoothly. And then, to my complete shock, a 4-star general walked through the door. General David Monroe was not what I expected. Despite his impressive uniform laden with medals and ribbons, he had kind eyes and a grandfatherly smile. He shook my hand warmly. Miss Collins, he said, I want to thank you personally for what you've done for Master Sergeant Mercer. Sometimes the bravest actions happen far from any battlefield. I blushed, uncomfortable with the praise. I just fed him, sir. Anyone would have done the same. The general's expression turned serious. No, they wouldn't. And that's precisely the point. The ceremony itself was brief but powerful. General Monroe spoke eloquently about courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that tie soldiers together. He detailed John's heroic actions in Afghanistan, painting a picture of a man who valued his comrades' lives above his own safety. When he finally pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to John's chest, John, now standing tall in a new suit the VA had provided, there wasn't a dry eye in the cafe. But the general wasn't finished. After honoring John, he turned to me. Sarah Collins, he announced, the United States Army would like to recognize your service as well. I started to protest, but he raised a hand to stop me. What you may not realize, he continued, is that by helping one veteran, you help us all. Your compassion, your willingness to see the person beneath the circumstances, reminds us of what we're fighting for. It reminds us of the country we serve, one where everyday heroes still exist. To my complete astonishment, he presented me with a Civilian Service Medal, the Outstanding Public Service Award, given to civilians who provide exceptional service to the Army and its personnel, for exemplary service, compassion, and dedication to the well-being of United States Army veterans. He read from the citation. I accepted the medal with trembling hands, unable to speak through my tears. Afterward, as the cafe filled with conversation and laughter, John found me in a quiet corner. You saved my life, he said simply. Not just by giving me food or a place to stay. You gave me back my dignity when I'd forgotten what that felt like. I shook my head. You saved yourself, John. You just needed someone to see you, really see you. He smiled then, a full genuine smile that transformed his face. Well, now everyone sees us both. In the months that followed, everything changed. With help from the VA and his former military connections, John found permanent housing and began training as a professional chef. He still works at my cafe 3 days a week, but now he's developing our menu, not just washing dishes. The publicity from the medal ceremony brought in new customers, and we've expanded the cafe to include a special program that trains homeless veterans in food service. We've helped 8 veterans find stable employment in the last year alone. But the most meaningful change has been in John himself. The shadows haven't completely disappeared from his eyes. I don't think they ever will. The wounds of war run too deep for that. But alongside them now is something that had been missing when I first met him. Hope. Every morning when John arrives at the cafe, he hangs his distinguished service cross on a hook in the kitchen to remind me, he once told me, that even when you think you've lost everything, your actions still matter. My civilian service medal hangs beside it, a daily reminder that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on foreign soil but in doorways and back alleys of our own cities, one meal and one moment of connection at a time. I never set out to change a life. I just couldn't bear the thought of someone going hungry when I had food to share. But that's the thing about kindness. You never know where it might lead. Sometimes to a general with a medal. Sometimes to something even more valuable, a life reclaimed, a purpose renewed, a friendship that transcends circumstance. And it all began with a cup of coffee on a cold winter morning. This story of compassion and recognition reminds us that veterans carry invisible wounds and untold stories. Behind many struggling veterans are heroes whose sacrifices we may never fully understand. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to Honor Echoes. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of courage, resilience, and the profound impact simple acts of kindness can have. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences with veterans in your community. And if you know a veteran in need, remember that sometimes the smallest gesture can be the first step in changing a life. For more incredible stories of veterans whose lives were transformed in unexpected ways, check out the video linked in the description and pinned comment. Until next time, this is Honor Echoes, where veterans' stories live on.